As you are here tonight, enter into this conversation, enter into this work, enter into this dialogue, enter into this action. So we say here, whoever you are, and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, you're welcome here in this church, in this space, as you are, to receive the blessings of God and to hear the call of God in your life. And I'm mindful that we are following many people who, whether they know it or name it or not, are people who've been called by God to lead us in the work of justice. Now, the Episcopalians are notoriously terrible at praying from off the cuff. So I'm going to say a prayer. I'm going to say a prayer, and if you wonder where it comes from, it's in the old Book of Common Prayer. It's actually the New Book of Common Prayer, which is also old. And it's a prayer for prisons and correctional institutions. Episcopalians love to be very specific and to write it out ahead of time. So here we go. Will the Lord be with you? And also with you. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, for our sake, you are condemned as a criminal. Visit our jails and prisons with your pity and judgment. Remember all prisoners, and bring the guilty to repentance and amendment of life according to your will, and give them hope for their future. When any are held unjustly, bring them release. Forgive us and teach us to improve our justice. Remember those who work in these institutions. Keep them humane and compassionate. Save them from becoming brutal or callous. And since what we do for those in prison, O Lord, we do for you, constrain us to improve their lives. All this we ask for your mercy's sake. Amen.
My name is McLees. I'm a member of this parish, which has taken it upon itself to learn about and think about issues of mass incarceration and what we can do to address it. Thank you, Wes, and thank you all for being here. You're here because you share our conviction that our state and our nation face a moral crisis in the manner in which we incarcerate many more people than are required for public safety. And because you share our determination to mobilize ourselves and our communities to address and end this crisis. The movement to bring an end to excessive incarceration is a growing movement in our country. And it must be a growing movement, equivalent to the civil rights movement 50 years ago, because the drive for reform faces entrenched preoccupations and entrenched interests every bit as formidable as those that the civil rights movement had to overcome. Now, what we call the criminal justice system, of course, is really in many ways a vast non-system of disparate elements, all of which have grown up separately to contribute to mass incarceration, and all of which must be addressed separately, as we'll hear in the course of these presentations. And each of these elements is full of people who are doing their best, often with good motives, to do their job, to meet the objectives of their institution, in many ways, to keep the public safe. So why do we regard the result of excessive incarceration of our citizens as a moral crisis that sets it apart from other serious problems that we face? Partly, it's because of the nature of the problem. Incarceration, combined with the restrictions imposed on people released from prison, robs people of their lives. And excessive incarceration robs people of their lives without justification. And partly it's because of the size of the problem. We still have more than 1.5 million people incarcerated at any one time, and the number is not increasing. But just as important, there are 6 or 7 million more that are still subject to the criminal justice system and formal restrictions on their lives, and perhaps another 20 million who have been released from prison, but not from the impact of being convicted and incarcerated because of the other restrictions in voting, in working, and many other ways that we place on their lives. Furthermore, we take exception on a moral basis for the transformation over the last 40 or 50 years in the rationale and purposes of incarceration, increasingly to be one of severe punishment, ever more severe punishment, and not a rationale or purpose of service to the community or to those who are incarcerated, to say nothing about restoration of justice in the community. Fundamentally, however, the phenomenon of excessive incarceration in our country presents us with a moral crisis because of its vastly disproportionate effect on African American men and women. Because, like slavery and Jim Crow before it, the massive increase over the last 50 years in incarceration and the numbers of those who feel the effects of having been incarcerated long after they've been released has been motivated and driven significantly by fear of black men, by representation of black men as the other, and by indifference to the issue of mass incarceration that primarily affects black and brown men and women. Because in effect, like slavery and Jim Crow before it, excessive incarceration functions as a mechanism of control and disenfranchisement of black and brown Americans. And because it functions to perpetuate the disproportionate economic disadvantage and poverty of African American citizens that grew out of slavery and Jim Crow. We're all indebted to authors like Michelle Alexander and Mark Maurer, journalists in public radio and Marshall Project and other organizations, and the producers of films such as the Netflix film 13th, which I hope you all have seen or will see, for giving us insights that enable us to name this crisis for what it is. And we're proud to be joined in preparing this series of programs by collaborators that share our convictions. By the organizations represented by our speakers and moderators that are at the forefront of efforts to bring reform to the system and relief to those affected by it. By Chicago Appleseed, which is in the forefront of holding courts accountable. By the Community Renewal Society, some representatives of which I think are probably here, which mobilizes religious leaders to bring justice to the criminal justice system. By Faith in Public Life, a national organization that places the moral argument for criminal justice reform at the center of its mission to bring a religious voice for social justice into the public square. By the Interfaith Coalition Against Racism, a group of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim congregations here in Chicago, of which St. Christopher's Church is a founding member, that is dedicated to identifying and eliminating overt and latent racism in our own organizations and in the broader Chicago community. By the People's Lobby, a powerful and growing political force in Chicago for electing and re-electing public officials who are committed to the agenda of changing governments in ways that promote social justice. And by the Village of Chicago, a group of citizens in this area of the city that includes many who have demonstrated their commitment to this movement with their support of these programs. Before I introduce the speakers and moderate the meeting, I'd like to say a word about the binder of materials we've received at the serve these 4 evenings. So you'll need to bring it back if you want to look at it during the subsequent programs. I hope you'll use it to supplement the information you're going to get from the speakers on these 4 evenings about the issues that arise from various elements of the system, the efforts that are underway to improve it, and about how we can get involved in those efforts. Before the first tab, you'll find a printout of a website with a website citation Clergy for drug policy remarks among others. I would direct your attention particularly to the first item, the joint statement on eliminating bias in the criminal justice system of the American Bar Association and the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP. Next tab has a deal about cash bail, the topic we're going to hear about that is developing in this state and this county. Next tab is focused on various appropriate and effective ways of diversion of offenders or alleged offenders from incarceration. It's specifically those that are affected by mental illness and substance abuse in juveniles. And also the growing interest in restorative justice. And I mentioned the restorative justice in this city, some of which are now being implemented in the courts, to provide another mechanism for a more profound divergence in the criminal justice system. The next section concerns the prosecutor. We're going to have a lot of focus on the prosecutor and prosecutor policy throughout these sessions. The next two sections, the two tabs focus on prison, release and reentry, what I referred to, parole and probation. Those will be topics addressed in our next session next week. There are efforts underway in Illinois, as many of you know, for reform of sentencing and criminal justice policy, and there will be a discussion of that. So summary of current issues in that regard is the next tab. Finally, we have a couple of tabs on how to get involved and resources which you have available to you. The material after getting involved is current as of today. We want it to be standard. We want to have information available to people. We actually have a card. We have a card in front of the reminder, which I hope you will think of using to suggest ways that you know about that aren't on that list, ways that people can get involved in solutions to the problems of the criminal justice system. And you'll see the efforts of some of the people here in this room. And then there's several books referred to with their covers under resources. I note with interest that the majority of those books were published in 2017, which is interesting commentary on the status of those issues. And finally, the tab with the bios of speakers. There's also a program in the front of your booklet for the team, which has abbreviated bios of our speakers and our moderators. We'll come up in a moment. We have Al Sharp, who's the founder and executive director of Clergy for drug policy, and previously the founder of Policy for the Common Good, who has had a lot to do with our organizing of our meetings, and many thanks to Al for that. Sharone, who's program director for the Illinois Justice Project, which is a key central organization in the city for convening people and other organizations who are devoted to this issue. And Professor Olson, graduate director of the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Loyola University, who you will find out knows a whole lot about this from many years of experience, some of which are summarized in your program. Our moderator from this evening requires no introduction to many of you. He's Wildeboer. He's the senior news editor at public radio WBEZ. And in that capacity, he has for many years led the station's coverage and investigative reporting on criminal justice issues that has been so consequential for our city. And his brief bio describes some of the many recognitions that he's received for his work in this area. We do want this program to be interactive as possible. There are question cards in your binder. If you have a question, please write it down. Raise your hand, someone will pick it up, and we'll try to organize that. There's no prohibition of yelling a question out, but this might help us to keep it organized. We are looking to finish by 8:30. We thank you very much for coming, and our speakers, Rob, can now take over. Thank you.
pleasure to be here. So as a reporter, you know, we do work, all this work where, you know, we do stories and we dig into things, and we kind of serve it up to the public, and that's where the journalist's role ends, right? We don't engage in activism because it's not our job. Our job in kind of a democracy is to shed light on issues, and then we hope that someone picks it up and like does stuff, right? We hope that our work reaches people and touches people and gets them to engage in some meaningful way. And so, as a journalist, I want to thank everyone here for being here tonight because it's really kind of, you know, it's compelling for me to see so many of you who are interested to learn something or interested to get involved. And I think often showing up is pretty much the biggest part, right? Kind of growing your body in the way that status quo in some way. So I think it's like not insignificant that each of you are here tonight. So it's a great pleasure to be here. John mentioned the guests we have, which are all experts. And the kind of plan for tonight is we're going to hear from Reverend Sharp first, kind of laying out some of the historical development of mass incarceration and where we are now. And you can do that in about 15 minutes from 1750 to current day. So that's great. And then Sharone Mitchell, who is at the Illinois Justice Project, is now, it was previously a Cook County public defender. So he's going to talk, hopefully tell us some little, a few stories about what that's like and how things play out in the courtroom now. And then Professor David Olson is master of all statistics, criminal justice related, nationally and here in Illinois. So we're lucky to have him here as well. He'll provide kind of some of the statistics and the numbers, and we'll have some real good information in terms of what incarceration looks like in Illinois, and maybe get some idea of what are some of the big things driving it. So with that, I'm pretty much done. So Reverend Sharp.
Let me first of all express great appreciation to John McLees and to St. Christopher Church for the remarkable organizational diligence and effort to get this evening together and this series together. I hope this will be the development of a base for continuing concern and involvement. There's so many folks working on this, and to broaden our base, to have a center, and to cooperate with all the great work that's being done for what really is not just something different than the civil rights movement, but an extension of the civil rights movement into the 21st century is terribly promising and terribly hopeful. I also would like to say a word of thanks 20 years later to Deborah Harrington of the Woods Fund of Chicago, who, when this was not an issue of public consciousness, when the whole notion of people having a second chance in this society, paying their debt to society, was not even conceivable, she started funding this whole area that we're going to hear about tonight. And I think that ought to be recognized 20 years later after her remarkable work. Now, I've been provide. Let me show these books. I don't know how many of you have read the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. This is the starting point for so many churches because she turned the phrase mass incarceration and really made it something that we all became aware of. But before her book, about 3 or 4 years earlier, was a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Punishment by T. Richard Snyder, which was a faith-based version of the same thing. And I love the title because it's called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Punishment, of course building on Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. But I do want to say that if you all read just one book on this topic, and it's come out very recently, it's called Inside Private Prisons, An American Dilemma in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And this summarizes in one chapter virtually all that you're going to hear about, certainly in terms of timing and origins tonight. So I recommend this book by Laura Brooke Eason called Inside Private Prisons. And the author is, I mentioned, Laura Eason. She's the senior counsel of the Brennan Center. Again, much of the data that I've given you comes here. Now, there are 4 overriding issues. I'm going to be tight, so I'm going to get in within the 15 minutes. 4 overriding issues that set the stage for this. The first is that mass incarceration is simply not an exaggeration. We are a prisoner nation. Most of you have heard that phrase. 5% of the world's population, 25% of its prisoners. 1 in every 31 people in this country have some connection with the criminal justice system, more than any other country in the world, Russia, China, South Africa. This despite the fact, and this is one of the causes, that the national crime rate is 1/2 of what it was in 1991. There are currently, and because John and I have a slight difference in figures, about 2.1 million currently incarcerated in the United States. 70 million Americans, 1 in 3 people, have a criminal record. And this is a figure that I hadn't heard, and I've been working on this for quite a while, until I read Laura Brooke Eason's book. This is heartbreaking. 74 million children in the United States have a parent in prison. She points out that in Sesame Street now, they have a figure named Alice, who's a Muppet, whose father is in prison. And as John pointed out, we've given up on rehabilitation in this country. Incapacitation is the dominant form of punishment. Rehabilitation just isn't on the scene for historical reasons we could explain in more time. Second point, which you've heard about, I'll cut through it very fast. Mass incarceration has devastated black and brown communities. Now, starting point, which I think most of you know, African Americans and Hispanics are significantly more likely to use or sell drugs than whites. Use is roughly constant across all ethnic groups. I will tell 2 stories involving Toni Preckwinkle, who's, I think, one of our heroes on this issue. No other politician is speaking out about the war on drugs to the extent that she is, and she did publicly on Monday. She tells the story of, as it happens quite a bit, outside groups coming in to see what's happening in Cook County Jail, how they're dealing with the many problems that they have. And at the end, she'll have a sit-down session with them. And a group came in, I think from Australia, and said, "Where's your jail for white people?" Speaking of Toni, and this is speaking to the whole notion of disproportionate impact, she testified Monday, as you may have seen, beautifully covered in the Sun-Times, about legalizing marijuana. My point is not about marijuana, it's about racial disparity. With a tired voice, she talks about how her daughter was at Northwestern, and she said to Toni, "You know, all these kids, there's pot all over the place. Nobody gets arrested here. You go to my neighborhood," and Toni said, "Yes, I know." And then she said, you go to my neighborhood, people are getting arrested all the time. Yes, I know, Jim. So it's about racial disparity. Another statistic, and I've tried to be careful about throwing out a lot of numbers, but you just can't get away from this. 1 in every 3 black men in this country will be incarcerated at some point in their lives if current trends continue. Young black men in Illinois are more likely to go to prison than to college. 2 decades, and John alluded to this, after the war on drugs began, 1 in 7 black men had nationally lost the right to vote. Now, impact on neighborhoods, if we're talking about Chicago. 70% of men between 18 and 45 in North Lawndale, West Side, are, we now say, not ex-offenders, but returning citizens. And about 40%, and David, you may want to comment on this statistic, well, I have, and this is from Michelle Alexander, about 40% of all those released from Illinois prisons each year return to just 6 communities in Chicago, 15 zip codes. And I'll tell you a story. One of our heroes tonight should also be Paula Wolf, who heads the Illinois Justice Project that Sharone is the executive director of. And she has a nice little story that says it all. One of the conditions of being on parole is you can't associate with felons. 70% of the men between 18 and 45 in North Lawndale are returning citizens. So her quote from Michelle Alexander is, it's hard for a parolee to walk to the corner drugstore to get a carton of milk without being subject to a parole violation. Third point, Cook County Jail is the largest mental health hospital in Illinois. 30% of the inmates are clinically mentally ill. At least 60% have substance abuse problems. You'll be hearing from Todd Dart, who runs the jail, I think, in the 3rd session here. Now, under Criminology and some causes. You know about Michelle Alexander. And for a long time, I thought she really was the starting point for this whole discussion. But you have to go back a lot earlier. You have to start, I think, and you could go back to 1750, but let's just start in 1960. The rise in the crime rate in the 1960s after a relatively stable period of time after World War II and the 50s. So starting in 1960, go back to a name that some of us will remember, Daniel Moynihan, working for Lyndon Johnson at that time as a researcher, did a private report of the Negro family, a case for national action. And he talked about the tangle of mythology of black urban families, illiteracy, single-parent households, and delinquency. So that was kind of intellectually setting the scene for something separate. Lyndon Johnson, we all know about his war on poverty, but that's not the only war he fought. He, as he was bringing forth the Great Society, he also created a war on crime, partly because of the increase in crime during that period. Remember Watts on the protests, Watts in 1965. So he created something called the Law Enforcement Administration of Justice, LEAA, which provided an infrastructure for responding to crime and some of the potential issues that were there. Richard Nixon, I'm going to do the chronology in part by political figures. Richard Nixon ran the Law and Order campaign. He created the Drug Enforcement Administration in 1973. It started under him with $75 million. Today it has $2 billion and 5,000 special agents. And the reason I mention that is because one of our one of our deepest problems is the entrenched bureaucracy that we have. We're trying to change things. You've had 20, 30 years of a bureaucracy that's built up that has to be dealt with in ways that I'll try to make clear later, and others will too. Nixon did declare a war on drugs. It was race-driven. I will quote from John Harrington, many of you have heard this quote, you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks, John Harrington being his chief of staff. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing. We're after the racists. Reagan continued the anti-crime strategy. He ramped up the war on drugs started in 1982. He built a bureaucracy. Federal expenditures grew from $86 million to over $1 billion in 10 years, starting in 1981. Now, an illustration of that, the power of that bureaucracy is that we're in the middle now, and it's not the most important fight, but it's an important one, to legalize marijuana. And I've tried to indicate that that even that is an issue of racial disparity. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug. What that means is on the registry of severity of drugs, that's the most severe drug, no medical value. You know that's not true. Most dangerous drug. Heroin is a Schedule II drug. Now why doesn't that change? Because you've got a whole lot of people whose careers are invested in a large bureaucracy who are simply not willing to change. Other things that happened under Reagan, civil asset forfeiture, where police were empowered to seize property related to alleged crime, including drug use. Citizens had to sue to get their property back. We would change that in Illinois. We have to do more, but we made progress. Mandatory minimums. I'm not going to define all these terms because it will come up, but I know you want me to do this all in 15 minutes. Mandatory minimum sentences, truth in sentencing, which means that you, by law, have to serve 85% of your sentence, no discretion, no matter what. 3 strikes and you're out. You have 2 felonies, and even a minor felony is a third. You're in for 25 years to life. Michael Dukakis, moving forward politically, and this is very important. When he ran against George Bush, you all remember the Willie Horton story. Someone came out on furlough, committed horrible crimes under the Dukakis administration as governor of Massachusetts, probably cost him the election. So if politicians weren't paranoid about being soft on crime, they certainly were after that. George Bush continued, especially his rhetoric against crack cocaine. Bill Clinton, and maybe this came up during the campaign because Hillary carried some of this baggage. Bill Clinton was extremely forceful with crime legislation. The Violent Crime and Control Act, 1994, $8 billion towards prison construction, $1.8 billion towards incarcerating aliens. There were more prisoners incarcerated under Clinton than either Bush or Reagan together. And they began to have a dominant effect at the state level. 20 states during that period did truth in sentencing and other comparable laws that Reagan had introduced. Prize prisons are part of this question. They were first introduced in 1995. They're only 8% of our population, but they survive, they adjust to where the need is. I think they're morally evil in concept. As the market began to dry up and they had an incentive to create a market for prisoners, they then began to adjust in the late 90s to move towards incarcerating immigrants. So 65, another heartbreaking statistic, or at least very telling one, 65% of all, they now have 65% of all the immigrants that are under ICE supervision. So to move more quickly, under Obama and Trump, I won't cover the details except you do know that the Obama presidency near the end of his second term is moving to curb a lot of what we're talking about with clemency, sentencing provisions, leeway to the states to experiment with marijuana. Now, and they ended the federal use of private prison, which of course Jeff Sessions immediately brought back, and their stock has risen enormously since that action. Why has all this happened? I'll give you some chronology. Briefly, increase in crime, our original sin of racism, the perpetual paranoia, as I said, of being soft on crime in our politicians, and the impact of the war on drugs on incarceration. Now, there have been some further revisions brought forward to those pieces that I've given you. Let me just put this aside so I don't drop it again. The first was by a scholar at Harvard who made a very good point, arguing that we've lost our local democracy. This gets into the question of the leeway that prosecutors have now. 95% of all cases are decided by plea bargaining in this whole area. Why does that happen? Because it used to be that you had jury trials, and juries lived in the communities where people were coming forward for their trials. The system was local. You had police, judges, and prosecutors from the community in which the community was being judged. Now that's not true. Police are financed by cities, not by states and counties. Judges and prosecutors are county, but they're elected sentencing structure and the leeway the prosecutors have to take advantage of that. Now, John Flatt is the second author of a book called Locked In, and his simple revision, but he explains also what I told you about prosecutors, is that the drug war wasn't as expensive in terms of the numbers. Only about a fifth of the people in prison now, and even in Michelle Alexander's period of study, were there for drug offenses. But the war on drugs created a sentencing structure that made all sorts of other things possible. The number of prosecutors has increased enormously, and a very important question for us to consider. And Kim Fox, our state attorney, will be here to talk about this, is what we can expect and ask of our prosecutors. Conclusion. Those are some key parts, explanations of how we've gotten to where we are. And it's not just because we're in a church. I would say we have a moral obligation to respond. There's a central Christian text, which I'm sure, again, most of you have heard, the Sermon on the Mount. And then, of course, Matthew 25, 31 through 46, the judgment of the nations. And the heads of the nations are saying, Jesus is saying to them, "Come, you that are blessed, inherit the kingdom prepared for you. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And they said, "When did we do these things?" Jesus says, "Just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it unto me." Now, my closing message is, visiting in prison doesn't mean only mercy and kindness and charity. It means justice. Let me close my part with some words about justice. Whereas where charity eliminates the effect of poverty, justice seeks to eliminate its causes. Charity is a matter of personal attribute. Justice is a matter of public policy. Justice redescribes the world. Justice is always inclusive.
All right, Sharone, so that's some of the history. Very briefly, can you take us into courtrooms and what does that look like? What are some of the experiences you've had? And kind of what are some of the lessons you've learned doing your work?
I learned, so I was a public defender. Give you a little background for Cook County, and I had the opportunity to be in lots of different spaces. I started off working in the Child Protection Division, where I represented mothers that were getting their kids taken away by DCFS. And I moved on and did misdemeanors, both from the north side and south side, dealing with, property crimes and theft crimes, and then moved on to 26th Street, where I did more serious, handled more serious cases. And I think what I realized, most of all, I realized three things. First, there's a fear that we have of individuals that come through the criminal justice system. When we look at them and they come through, whether we're prosecutors or defense attorneys or judges, we don't particularly look at them as our brothers or sisters, or they could be our brothers or sisters. We look at them as kind of like this faceless enemy. And we don't use their first names. When we talk about numbers or how long they're going to get, instead of saying 7 years in prison, we say 7, because it's not really real. There's also otherization. We don't come from their communities. We're not their skin color. We're not in their class. They're just not like us. And I also think about, a lack of strategy. Lots of things that are done in the criminal justice system are done not because they're the right things to do, not because they're based on data. They're done because that's the way we were taught to do it. The person that trained me, that's the way they did it. And the person that trained them, that's the way they did it. So when people have, when they think about reforms and we think about better ways of doing things, think about rehabilitation, and we think about maybe we'll put people in a situation where they don't come back. That doesn't happen, right? Because we're just worried about kind of locking people up. We don't think through what we're doing. We just kind of lock folks up and don't worry about it. So that's kind of my experience working as a public defender. There are definitely stories I can tell kind of going through the system if you'd like me to do that now. Or,
yeah, sure. If you got
sure. Well, I think it starts with the arrest period, right? When an individual is arrested, I'll take a step back. I was talking to this commander of the Chicago Police Department, and we were talking about this thing called disproportionate minority contact. That is that police are kind of have this overwhelming contact with black and brown folks. And we were talking about these stats, and some of the stats that Reverend Al was talking about how black and brown folks they smoke marijuana at the same level as everybody else, but they are disproportionately affected in terms of arrest rates and conviction rates. And I was like, and this happens in Chicago, so what's your answer to that, officer? And I thought I got him. I thought I was burning. I was like, yeah. And he was like, of course we do that. He said, we don't enforce the drug code all across the city the same way. That'd be silly. There's no way we can do that. We enforce the drug code in certain areas that we think are dangerous. And it made sense to him. Why would we do that? But when I talk about thought and thinking what the effect of that is, well, that colors out what our jails look like and what our prisons look like. If individuals are only targeted in certain communities, the jails and the prisons will look like that. When you move on from arrest and you go on to bond court, that's the place where individuals go right after they're arrested. We are getting away from it here in Cook County, but we're still kind of across the state and still in Cook County a little bit, relying on a system of cash bond, meaning that judges will make a determination about whether you are guilty or whether you should be in custody during your trial or not be in custody. And judges will say, well, listen, you can get out, but you need to pay a cash bond. And you need to pay $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. Well, what happens when we have a criminal justice system in Cook County where the majority of people are poor? Well, that means the majority of people get stuck in jail. And when they're stuck in jail, the data is pretty clear that they're more likely to plead guilty. And not only are they more likely to plead guilty, they're more likely to serve longer sentences. And that's not even counting the effects it has on somebody's person, their ability to care for their kids or care for their elders or maintain a job or continue their education. And then when we get into the actual courtroom, as Reverend Al was talking about, we have this system of plea bargaining in the jury tax. I think back to, I had a case, lots of cases, but I had a case with an individual who was charged with armed robbery. And the story was that he ordered a pizza, and the guy knocked on the door and said, here, I have a pizza. The pizza's $15. And he said, nah, man, I think the pizza's $12. And they got into a big argument, and there was pushing and shoving, and the guy took the pizza and he closed the door. Well, the pizza delivery man got to his car and called the police. The police came, and the man was arrested. And he was arrested for armed robbery because I think he had something in his hand. So, I was a public defender, and I was talking to him about the case, and I was saying I think this is a good trial, and we should do it. And then the prosecutor came along, and the prosecutor said, well, you know what? Or maybe it was a judge and said, you know what? This is an armed robbery. This guy's got a background. If you go to trial and you lose, you're going to get 21 years. But if you plead guilty today, you'll get 3. Well, what happened? He pled guilty, all right? And that scenario plays on over and over and over in the criminal justice system, where individuals, or our criminal justice system, there are multiple criminal justice systems, but our system, where people make decisions about what happened, not because of what they did or what they didn't do, but the consequences they could potentially face. On the flip side of that, I defended a man, he was a mentally ill man, who went to a Target, and he was alleged to have stolen a bunch of stuff. And he had cognitive problems, but the hospital said that he was fit to stand trial. So the prosecutor came to him and said, hey, this is not a very serious offense. We're going to give you 1 year in jail, 1 year in prison. And the man said, no, I'm going to go to trial. So we went to trial, and we lost. And that 1 year turned into 6 years. 6 times the amount he went to prison. So that's that same jury tax and plea bargaining. Those are the type of things that we deal with, and I dealt with as a criminal defense attorney, and some of the things that we hope to reform.
Can I ask the guy in the argument over the pizza? You know, one of the things I think Reverend Al as well as John mentioned is in terms of the moral imperative here and race. And I'm curious what race he was.
He was black.
Yeah, because I wonder if police in a white neighborhood would handle that a little differently, rather than arresting the person in the first place.
I experienced that myself going home. From the south side. I love pizza. I clearly love pizza. My wife could attest that I love pizza. But the treatment of me in a suit is much different than the treatment of me in a hoodie. And that extends not just to me, but to whole communities, right? Folks don't understand why folks run from the police. Why would you run from the police? And the fact of the matter is that the police represent a different thing to different people. I think that the majority of police officers really want to do the right thing, but we have to understand the historical context behind that and how people feel. And it's part of that is the treatment that people have the treatment of people. It's unfortunate.
Can I ask, you mentioned, you referenced in terms of the criminal justice system, there's a lack of a strategy. It's not like the whole system was designed to function the way it's currently functioning. And I think we're going to, probably this group over the next 4 weeks will get to asking questions about like what are things that can be done. And it feels a little like whack-a-mole. It's like you're talking like about bond court right now. So there's efforts there, and then there's efforts about, marijuana and can you just talk about that lack of a strategy and what were kind of some of your observations and what do you mean by that? Just talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, when I talk about when we talk about consequences, when individuals were sent to prison, they're not sent to prison because we think that they're going to be better or we think that they're so dangerous they can't be in society. We decide just based upon what their background is or what the charge is. We don't think that if we do this person's going to become back a better person and they'll be able to kind of be productive citizens. We just kind of throw numbers out without any concern with what effect that's going to happen on that person or that person's family or that person's community. We don't do things with a purpose. We just do things because that's what we did before.
Well, and you mentioned that before in terms of, you're trained by the person who was there before, who was trained by the person who was there before. But I mean, having worked in the public defender's office, my understanding is folks are pretty busy. You were probably pretty busy. How did you deal with that personally, where you were just making the sausage, as it were, rather than what are you supposed to do? Right?
You do the best that you can. And, it's funny, in Cook County, we're actually kind of blessed. We are an overcrowded system, and we have tons and tons of cases, but there are places across the country that are even worse. So you do what you can. What do they call it in the ER where you try to treat the worst cases? Triage, right? You do a lot of triage. You try to work on the cases that you can, and some cases you just don't have the time to work on. And And that creates a really unfortunate situation.
Well, that's depressing.
No, it's great. Yeah.
That was not the solution I was looking for. Okay, thank you, Sharone. Professor Olson, you've got some numbers.
I'll give the solution.
Great,
Thanks.
fantastic. Thanks for solving this.
It's all so depressing. I'll try to do it. Give me a second to get things going. I'll find my microphone.
Yeah.
It's free and everybody can't hear it. That work okay? People hear me so far so good?
Hey, hey.
It'll get a little brighter as it warms up. So, my apologies. I'd hoped to get the presentation to John in time for him to make copies and put it in everybody's binder, but unfortunately that didn't work out. So, as I finished it this afternoon, I got it to my colleagues here, but I'm going to get it to John and he'll put it up on the website and get it to people if you're interested. So. Again, I appreciate everybody coming out here. This is what I think really needs to be done in order to improve the system, and that's to get a lot more people aware of what's going on and what needs to be done, because ultimately everybody in this room is playing a role in this. Everything we're talking about ultimately needs to result in changes in policy and practice among our elected leaders, and it's getting people who vote and people who are engaged aware of what's happening so that things can improve. So what I'm going to try to present, and I can tell that having breakfast with Al once a month is starting to rub off because he's starting to sound more like a researcher and a statistician. So he stole some of my numbers. I'll try to provide you with a little bit of a different take on it. So really what I want to try to get across to you is how did we get to this position, and not as much the historical context that Al laid out with political shifts and things like that. But I tend to be a little bit more pragmatic. I really look at numbers. I'm a social scientist. I'm not an elected official. I'm not a politician. So I tend to take a pretty objective look at things. I want to try to share that with you. A few of the things I want to make sure you realize is how we got here isn't necessarily a simple answer. Unfortunately, particularly when I talk to reporters, they usually want, just tell me the simple answer. And the simple kind of soundbite, I said, unfortunately, there isn't, and so I usually don't get quoted often. My long 35-minute explanation that doesn't really prove it soundbite. But how we got here isn't simple, and the solutions are not going to be simple. There's a lot of different things that have to happen. But the way I'm starting to see it is a lot of little things, when I add it up, start to make a bigger change, a bigger impact. One of the things that needs to change is the public dialogue around crime, and it's been alluded to already. We tend to describe criminals as though they're a monolithic group, that they're all the same. We've gotten to the point where we tend to equate crime with murder, so any crime is murder, and any criminal is a potential murder, and that's really kind of affected the dialogue. We also recognize the impact that rhetoric can have. I wanted to use the term bully pulpit. And I had to make sure I knew what the definition of that was, because I use a lot, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't using it incorrectly. So realize just the fact that elected officials can use rhetoric and shape and influence our perceptions is that idea of a bully pulpit. I say for better or for worse, right? Tony Crockett's used her bully pulpit in an effective way to change policy, just like other elected officials have used it to change policy in ways that people don't necessarily think is effective. The other thing I want to make clear, and it kind of gets to Rob's question about what's the strategy, we have to realize that state legislatures can do certain things, but ultimately it's local justice systems that have to change. There is no one in charge of the justice system. There's 800 local police departments in Illinois, there's 102 elected state's attorneys in each county. We have a lot of different criminal justice systems, all operating differently and with different goals. So I want to go through some things. There'll be a fair amount of numbers. That's the way I tend to do things, but I also try to boil it down so that you leave with some simple ideas as to what I'm trying to convey. The first thing I always point out is reality is not what we see on TV. It's not what we read in novels. Reality in the criminal justice system is is almost equivalent to what I'm showing here. I use this in a class to kind of get students to realize that in real life, most crimes don't get solved. Unfortunately, this illustration is almost accurate. Only about 5 to 10% of crimes that occur get solved. In Chicago, only about 20% of homicides get solved. And so what we see on TV in terms of the seriousness of crime, how quickly we catch people and achieve justice, really isn't how the system works. And we've got to realize that the actual system is much more difficult and complex. And like I said before, we've got to realize that crime does not equal murder. We've got to start realizing that criminals aren't this monolithic group. So I'm going to go through some graphs. Some of these are just to show you some facts. I always try to back up my statements with objective information so you don't think I'm making things up. So when we look at Illinois' prison population, over the last couple of years it started to go down. Right? So I also teach classes on statistics and how to present data, so I'm going to play around with data and show you different ways to look at it to kind of get you to think a little bit differently about this. So this is one way to look at the trends in Illinois' prison population over the last few years. If we mess with the scale, right, so let's start playing around with the scale so that it looks a little bit better or more dramatic. What I want to kind of focus on are some things that have changed that are driving Illinois' prison population. So I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform. We were convened January of 2015. We finished our final report at the end of 2016 and recommended a lot of policy changes and suggested changes to the law. Since our commission was formed until now, Illinois' prison population has gone down 13%. Right? That's a good thing. Right? We should be positive about it. It reflects some changes that have occurred. The goal of the Governor's Commission was a 25% reduction in the prison population by 2025. So the way I look at it, we're halfway there. Right? We've cut the prison population by 13%, and we're only 2 years into that time period until 2025. So things are looking pretty big. So we should make a big deal out of that. People like Rob should tell his reporters, hey, there's this trend going on that we should talk about and cover more. And the reason why I think it's important to cover and talk about more is when you put it in a larger context and realize how unique and how dramatic a 13% drop in this prison population is. In the last 3 years, we've seen the prison population go down 13%. That's the largest decrease in Illinois' prison population since the Vietnam War. And before that, the last time we had a substantial decrease in the prison population was World War II. Right? Hopefully you start seeing some of the patterns, right? World War II, Vietnam War, a lot of the crime-prone population wasn't here to commit crime, right? They were elsewhere. But between 1980 and 2000, our prison population in Illinois increased almost 300%. Right? So a 13% increase, big deal. I agree. When you look at a 270% increase, a 13% drop is not that big of a deal. But it's a difference. It's a different trajectory that we're on. We're seeing a different pattern. And so someone needs to start talking about, hey, we're starting to see the prison population heading in a direction that's a little bit more positive. So what I want to try to do is give you some information about why have we seen not only this growth in the prison population, but the drop in the prison population as well. So there's a lot of bullet points here. I just want to kind of hit on what the highlights are. For those of us who study correctional populations, there's two basic things we always look at. The number of people who are admitted to prison and how long they serve. Those are the two things that drive correctional populations in the United States. So an increase in admissions or an increase in length of stay. From the 1980s to the 1990s, both of those things occurred. We saw both things happen. More people going to prison and staying for a longer period of time. And Reverend Sharp's points are important. Part of it is because we had an increase in crime. There was more crime in Illinois and in the United States in the 70s and 80s. More murders, more rapes, more armed robberies. So as a result, we saw more people going to prison. But we also saw a shift in our drug policy and a shift towards an emphasis on enforcing our drug laws. But we didn't enforce all drug laws equally. As Sharone pointed out, we were selective in the laws that we cracked down on. We didn't do a whole lot with enforcing cannabis laws, even cocaine, heroin, those kinds of things. And I call the period of the late 80s through the 90s the real war on drugs. For those of you who study drug policy, many point to the early 1900s as the first war and President Nixon's war on drugs. I describe the current war, or the period of the 80s and 90s, as the real war on drugs because we actually took prisoners. We really used the system of incarceration as a response to drug law violators, as opposed to creating bureaucracies and getting involved in international work. We really started to take prisoners of our own population. The other thing we saw was what I call the trickle-down rhetoric. Elected officials at the federal level, presidents who really have no control whatsoever as to what state and local government do, but boy, do they have the power of the bully pulpit to shape and influence public attitude, and influencing public attitude that translates into them putting pressure on their locally elected officials to do, in quotes, something about the drug problem, something about the violent crime problem. Right? So those are some things that drove the increase, and I'll show you some information to kind of illustrate this. Since the year 2000, admissions to Illinois prison are actually down a lot, but you notice that the prison population didn't really decrease all that much. And that's because the prison population started, or the admissions to prison started going down, we lengthened how long people stay in prison. Just to give you a couple of examples, if you went to prison for murder in the 1970s, the Illinois average would serve about 10 years. By the 1990s, it was around 20 years. Today, if you go to prison for the crime of murder, you'll spend about 45 years in prison. Really not, as Sharone pointed out, a strategy to address the problem, but rather the ratcheting up of our punitive response, with no evidence that it's actually going to have the kind of impact. The other thing that's important about the war on drugs is we changed our drug laws to where we equated certain drug law violations legally the same as we define things like criminal sexual assault and attempted murder. So in Illinois, if you sell $1,500 worth of cocaine, legally that crime is viewed the same as if you commit a rape, an armed robbery with a firearm, or if you attempt murder. When we have that kind of environment where we do a drug law like that, you can understand why we would then look at crimes like homicide and say, well, 20 years really isn't sufficient, they should serve 45 years. So it's the rhetoric that surrounds all of our punishment that's kind of risen the floor, if you will, on how we punish. So again, just because I've got to prove that what I said isn't made up, in the 70s and 80s, we saw a dramatic increase in crime in the United States. You could understand why elected officials would be pressured to do something about the problem. Violent crime reached record levels in the early 90s, just around the time that the war on drugs was really in full steam, and President Clinton got elected on a platform of doing more to address crime. Not only did he hire a lot more police, but he incentivized states to adopt truth in sentencing laws. If you pass laws that keep people in your state prisons there longer, the federal government will give you money as an incentive to do that. With the war on drugs, we saw a dramatic increase in the 1980s of the arrests of people for violating the laws regarding the illegal possession and sale of drugs other than marijuana. So during the 1980s, arrests for those offenses increased by about 500% in the United States. During that time period, drug use was cut in half. Drug use was cut in half before we started this enforcement. Right? So the drug use trend was already going down before we started the war on drugs, but it fit in well with the narrative of this connection between drug use, violence, impoverished communities or inner cities, and that all kind of came together to reduce some of these changes. So again, going back to Illinois' trends in their prison admissions, from 1989 to 2000, we doubled the number of people we sent to prison in Illinois. So we increased our prison population by 22,000. When we look at the types of crimes that are driving that increase, there's a couple of important points. One is, like I said in the first slide, it's not a simple explanation as to what's behind this. So what this graph shows is 15% of the growth in Illinois' prison population during that time period was due to more people being in prison for murder. Right? Another 23% of the growth is due to people being incarcerated for other forms of violence. Right? So it at least worked out evenly, where about a third of the increase in Illinois' prison population is violent criminals, a third of the increase is drug law violators, and a third of the increase is other types of crimes, property crimes. If you look at this in quotes, only 10% of the growth in Illinois' prison population is because of people in prison for drug law or drug possession offenses. In Illinois, the possession of cannabis is a misdemeanor offense. You cannot be sentenced to prison for it. So I always like to point that out because people hear about legalizing marijuana and think that that will somehow change our utilization of prison. Unless we have this trickle-down theory again, where if we start getting less punitive with marijuana, we start getting less punitive with other drugs, maybe it'll happen. But cannabis really doesn't drive the prison population. I always kind of show this graph just to show you the red line is what Illinois' prison population does look like. The black line with the dots on it is the pretend prison population if no one was sentenced to prison for violating our drug laws. It would be lower, but our prison population today would still be almost 4 times what it was back in the 1970s. So part of the problem is our drug laws and changing that, but that in and of itself is not going to get us to a prison population that was more like the 1970s without doing more with it. Why has the prison population gone down in the last few years? In that case, almost all of the decrease in the prison population is because of fewer people in prison for non-violent crimes. So almost half of the decrease is because of fewer people in prison for property crimes, almost 40% for drug law violations, so a drop in people in prison for that. Almost none of the decrease in the prison population is because of fewer people in prison for murder. Like I said before, the policies we've implemented on how we sentence people for murder will ensure that the proportion of people in prison for murder is exceedingly high. Right? 1 in 7 people in the Illinois prison system is serving a sentence for murder. Because while they come in small numbers, they don't leave for 45 years. They tend to build up in the population. I also want to make you realize that the changes that occur in very small places geographically can have very profound impacts on the system. So when we look at drug arrests, the reason why we have fewer people going to prison for drug law violations is because we're arresting fewer people. In Chicago, arrests for drugs other than marijuana, which are all felony offenses, is down 80% in the last 15 years. It's not because 80% fewer people use drugs. Right? It's not because we've changed our laws as it relates to drugs that don't involve cannabis. It's a change in the attitude, and it's a change in the mindset, and it's a change in what the public wants. And that's trickling down to what the police on the street are focusing on. You arrest 80% fewer people, it's not a shock to realize that you'll send 70% fewer people to prison for those offenses. So it's important to recognize that what the police do and what they prioritize will have a profound impact on the prison system. I wanted to close with a couple of comments about the impact of incarceration beyond just these kinds of numbers, and talk a little bit about the impact from a fiscal perspective and also from the impact it has on people and communities. There's a lot of effort right now to address the mass incarceration and the overuse of prison. Pessimistically, I think a lot of what's driving that is the realization that, boy, does this cost us a lot of money. Illinois' prison system, just operating prisons themselves, is about a $1.5 billion enterprise that doesn't include capital costs and retirement benefits for employees. So on average in Illinois, it costs about $38,000 per year to incarcerate someone in prison. An extremely expensive endeavor. We're really good at prisons being punitive, but $38,000 is a lot of money for punishment. We don't do a lot with respect to rehabilitation, so we're not really buying a whole lot of public safety. So the other way to translate it is for every 27 people in prison per year, that's $1 million. There's a line that's used in prison policy about $1 million blocks. It's a description of how in certain communities there's 27 people from that block that are incarcerated, so the state is spending $1 million a year to incarcerate people in those communities. The issue with the fiscal angle on it is this is in many ways purely redistributive politics. The source of money that funds prisons primarily comes from the suburban areas of Chicago. That's where the majority of the property taxes, income taxes that fund the prisons come from, is the suburbs of Chicago and certain areas of Chicago. But the money is not spent in the communities where the individuals who are incarcerated are from. They're spent in communities in rural parts of Illinois. So you see this transference of not only resources but people. And that's what's behind the economic dependence now that communities have on prisons. We've created an environment where in rural communities, prisons are a necessary function and a necessary industry in order for them to have opportunities for employment. Clearly, prisons have an adverse impact on communities. One way to kind of look at it is about 17% of the people in prison are from 6 specific zip codes in Chicago. So 17% of the people in prison are from those 6 specific neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods account for less than 3% of Illinois' population. So you can see again how the disproportionate impact on communities is such that these communities are where the people are being extracted. They're being housed in prisons in rural Illinois, and the money to support that is coming from the suburban tax base. Right? I'm not going to get into some of the other theoretical stuff because we're running out of some time, so I want to wrap it up with a couple things. Just a statement that I think summarizes some of the thinking of elected officials on this. I'm not running for office, so nothing I say is a political statement, but I think it's telling. This kind of illustrates one of the challenges that we have. One of the goals of reducing the prison population in Illinois is theoretically to save money. And so if you reduce the prison population by 25%, the logic would follow that, well, then you should save some money from that. The challenge will be, in order to save money, you have to actually close prisons. And I question whether or not there's the political will to actually do that. So these are some quotes from Governor Quinn, again, not saying anything political about it. These are press releases that he issued, so you could look them up yourself. But this was a discussion about whether or not the state should close Pontiac Correctional Center. It's one of Illinois' oldest prisons, built in 1871. Run down, needs a lot of work, they wanted to close it. And the quote from the governor at the time said, "Keeping this prison open will ensure that nearly 600 people in the region keep their jobs. We don't want these families being uprooted, and we don't want we want to allow Pontiac to maintain one of its largest sources of revenue." When I saw it, at least he had the fortitude to say what everybody already knows about how we look at some of these things. The quote also talked about this being a fiscally responsible decision because it provides nearly 600 jobs and generates $54 million for the region. And when I saw this, I realized that the purpose of prisons truly has transformed. Right? From the early origins in the 1700s, where we sent people to prison to do penance and to rehabilitate and read the Bible, to where now the purpose of prisons is they are good sources of jobs for people in these communities, and that's what is going to be articulated. The last point that I'll make is where we go from here. So a couple things. One is all the changes we've seen in Illinois, this drop of 13%, none of it has been the result of any change in law in Illinois. We have not changed our laws in Illinois to explain that. There have been laws that were passed as a result of the Governor's Commission recommendations that take effect January 1st. Right? So they started to take effect, but they haven't yet been reflected. So I think that given the Governor's Commission recommendations, the way we identified those was how many of those recommendations, if implemented, would get us to that goal of a 25% reduction. So there is some positive news ahead. If some of these policies get implemented, we'll see that reduction. The conversation around drug laws is important, not only because, as Alice talked about, the moral imperative of how we view substance abuse and that behavior, but also I think once we start to ratchet back some of the rhetoric about that, maybe we can start ratcheting back some of the rhetoric around some of the other policies. And we also have to ask at what point has punishment been achieved. Really what's driving Illinois' prison population now is the extremely long periods of time we hold people who've been convicted of a violent crime. And we have to come to a decision as a society. Is 35 years just as sufficient punishment as 45? Is that 10 years longer really achieving a lot for us in terms of retribution and punishment? Because it certainly isn't buying us a lot more public safety by the time people have served that. Last two things, for better or for worse, it's hit now to be all about reform and evidence-based practices and right on crime and all that. So I think we're at a point where there's a lot of support for reform. I think the motivations are different. There's some people whose motivation is our system is brutal and racist and is disproportionately impacting poor people. Other people's motivation is this costs us too much money and we want to be able to lower taxes and things like that. I guess in the end, if we get to the same point, it's a good thing. And then finally, to use the phrase all politics are local, ultimately all things about the justice system really are local. And we have to realize that things in terms of improvement are made community by community, county by county, elected official by elected official. And so I appreciate your participation, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of perspective on not only the challenges of how we got here, but some of the challenges of what it will take to get us back to where we want to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So a couple of things that were said kind of resonated with me tonight. Well, first, Reverend Sharp mentioned, the passage where it says, when I was in prison, you visited me. As a journalist, I had a little trouble with actually visiting prisons, quite a bit. But one experience, Professor Olson put up a picture of Pontiac Prison up there. And a few years ago, after having to threaten to sue the governor, we finally, this was during the time of when Pat Quinn was in office, we were finally able to get into several prisons. And I'd done a bunch of research and stories on prisons, so I'd talked to people like Professor Olson and lots of smart people who know a lot about prisons who had told me a lot. And we finally got permission to go into the prisons to see. And I walked into Pontiac, and there's not the one you pictured, but the one that's further west, the block that's further west, the segregation unit. I walked into the segregation unit, and I was actually talking about it with a colleague today. I walked in the unit, and on the left side, it's a wall that goes up high, and there's like a 25-foot kind of gallery. And then on the right side, it's probably, 4 or 5, maybe 6 stories of cells of men who are kept in segregation, meaning they're kept locked up. But segregation does not mean alone. Segregation just means you aren't free to move in general population, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong here, anybody. And there were 2 men per cell. They were all looking out their cells, with their hands on the bars and whatever, and looking out at me. And it was just a wall of men that, it must go 800 feet or something in there, this one cell block. And it's 4 or 5 stories high, and the noise is just unbelievable. And I thought, if I was here, I'd last maybe 24 hours before, losing my, whatever. And it stuck with me it really kind of made an impact on me. And, to the point that Sharone was making earlier, I was like, anybody who came in here would be like, this doesn't make any sense at all. I'm just convinced, anybody who walks in there would be like, this is no one planned this. This is clearly not a great idea. So we're going to get to solutions, but and as an objective journalist, of course, I really don't have strong opinions about what should be done, and I really do believe it's up to citizens to decide those things. But I will say, as a journalist, I would encourage each of you or a group of you to make a trip to Pontiac Prison, to walk through the entire prison. My experience as a journalist is that a lot of this is misunderstood. It's behind fences and prison walls, so we can't see it. Out of sight, out of mind. So that would be one thing I would put forward for your consideration. I was wondering, Professor Olson, can you talk about, you mentioned drug laws and drug convictions. And I think a lot of people think like, you know, if we end drug prosecutions, that's going to clear out the prisons. That's the cause of mass incarceration. Is that the case, or how much is that the case in Illinois?
It's not a lot. I think, you know, I had the graph that said we didn't send anybody to prison. You know, like, instead of having 42,000 people in prison right now, we have 38,000 or 37,000. Right? So that's been.
So wait, if we didn't prosecute any drug crimes or released all the people there on drug charges, we'd bring the population down by like 10%.
Right.
Yeah, and nationally, John Pfaff said, you know, 20% if you're talking about the whole country, not just Illinois. But the thing I think you have to add is the drug laws created a climate for more heavy sentencing in a way that Professor Olson has laid out, you know, very, very well. So it created a room for prosecution. I think the other thing we've lost sight of, or haven't introduced here, is the impact of people simply being arrested, going through the jail process in Cook County Jail, and then coming out, staying maybe 25 days, then not even going to trial for low-level drug offenses. They don't show up in prison, but that arrest shows up in their lives, and all the consequences that come from that. Loss of job, messing up family, loss of car. You would know about that, Sharone.
And one of the things too is we kind of think about incarceration as kind of the final kind of impact, but another big impact is just a felony conviction, right? Because a felony conviction really incarcerates you in your mind, in your home, right? It affects your ability to live, to acquire housing, education, all of these things. So we have to think about kind of what felonies do to people. And when we think about the drug laws, you know, cannabis isn't a felony, but any other possession of any other drug, no matter how small it is a felony. So it's one of the things I think that we need to kind of look at and turn around. And we have to realize we over-pursue communities, and we have limitations in those communities because you're looking around for drugs. And if you're looking around and you're there, you're going to find crime. So one of the things to think about.
And Dave, could you talk a little bit too about, like, you mentioned murder convictions and sentences, and they've spiked up a lot over, according to what you just said, since like the 1970s. They were more like 20 years and 10, and now they're more like 30 or 40 or even more. What do murder sentences look like in like other countries? Is the U.S. an outlier here, or is this pretty standard?
I think the U.S. is an outlier. I'm not sure how much Illinois is an outlier. But part of the thing to realize with that is the reason why Illinois got to this point where you go to prison and serve 45 years is Illinois took the bait that the federal government offered in the early 90s. And they said, if you pass a law that requires people convicted of serious crimes to serve 85% or 100% of their sentence, we'll give you money. And you can use that money to build more prisons. And when Illinois passed the law, the expectation was all the judges and prosecutors would just adjust their sentencing, right? And instead of imposing sentences of 40 years where you serve half of it, which is the way the sentencing structure worked, the assumption was, okay, judges will just impose a 20-year sentence and you'll serve 100% of that. That gamble didn't pay off, right? Judges didn't change their sentencing, prosecutors didn't change their sentencing, so it literally resulted in people spending twice as long in prison. And so when we look at who commits murder, in Chicago and Illinois, it tends to be people that are relatively young. Most of the people who commit murder are under the age of 25. Psychology is recognizing with brain development that they're not fully, they're not cognitively developed, they're highly impulsive, they do things without even thinking through it. And now those behaviors literally do cost them their lives. They commit a crime when they're 20. The soonest they will get out of prison, if they get the minimum sentence, is 65 years old. And so that was an example of where the height of the rhetoric in the early 90s resulted in us doing something that now is extremely difficult to undo. The Governor's Commission wrestled with that. We tried to come up with a way to try to make recommendations on how the legislature could address that. I think the closest we got, the final recommendation is rather than serving 100%, they should serve 90%, which a lot of people had the same reaction that you did. They said that's the best we could do. The Governor's Commission was a bipartisan group. It represented very diverse interests. So it was effectively like a small legislative body, in order for us to make recommendations, we had to have a majority of members vote for it. So that was what the majority of members could vote for. On the other hand, we also recommended that possession of a controlled substance be a misdemeanor offense. So it's what I'm realizing is there's a lot of playing with this law going with policy, and the hope is that if we change this law, maybe we can get some movement on those.
And so it sounds like you're a proponent of bringing down those murder sentences. I mean, what's the argument you would make? I mean, I guess it's something like, well, what's the payoff? We imprison a guy from the time he's 25 years old to the time he's 45 years old. What's the payoff for continuing to imprison him from 45 to 65? What do we know about that part of the sentence?
We know they're still young enough to have a semblance of a life and contribute to society. We know that the longer we keep them in prison, the more likely we're also going to be starting to pay extremely expensive medical for extremely expensive medical care. And so what we have is we have a lot of prisons that are both a prison with all the costs associated with that, plus they are an acute residential facility for elderly inmates. Right? So, part of the idea is again getting at this moral dilemma. At what point has the person served their sentence? In Germany, I think the typical murderer spends about 10 years in prison. The expectation is that they go to prison, they're rehabilitated, and they're released and they contribute to society. And so when some people see that, some of them think, boy, has Germany got it wrong? And I think people in Germany look at us and say, what are you really getting for 45-year sentences on murders other than an extremely expensive system?
Okay, I think we had cards. John, did you want to collect some of those up? We got lots of questions.
Well, before doing that, I'll mention the question of cash bail effect and what is in place in county jail on different prisoners. And maybe you guys could elaborate a little bit about that issue and what's been happening. We covered it with the binder, the Charles Gray might be here, you might be able to elaborate. But I think it's important for people to understand the moment where we are and what needs to be done to make sure that the reforms that are underway are actually implemented. Maybe somebody will elaborate on the issue of cash bail and how important it is in terms of the impact of incarceration on people that have been convicted.
Yeah, so we know that when individuals arrested, they go in front of a judge makes a determination about whether they stay in prison, whether they stay in jail, or whether they remain outside of jail. And basically what we've done across most of the country is had judges basically say that if a person can get out of jail, but if they want to get out of jail, they essentially have to pay a bribe. And combining that fact with the idea that we know that the majority of people who are stuck in the criminal justice system don't have a lot of money in the first place, they remain in jail. Now, there's been a great coalition of organizations in the city of Chicago here that have tried to slow down the process of cash bail. And that coalition has started to become successful. We know that because of reforms that have been made that require judges to set bail amounts at numbers that people can afford and use that as a last resort, really. That's the most important thing. Not use jail, because remember, we're talking about innocent till proven guilty. No evidence can actually admitted against the person. We've started to see the jail population go down. So, about 4 or 5 years ago, we were at 10,000. Now we're at 6,100. But those are temporary reforms. They were done through the chief judge of Cook County making a decision and an order. But that order is not binding. We can still have cash bail across the entire state. So the fight is not over yet. You'll read stories that there have been reforms and those reforms have taken hold, but just know those are temporary and that we continue the fight. The population about a month ago dropped under 6,000 and now it's creeping back up. It's at 61, it's at 62. So we still need folks to work on that issue. It needs to be a permanent solution.
All right, here's a question. How will the focus on opioids change our justice system related to drugs? And I think this is specifically as it relates to race.
Well, I'll speak to at least a part of that. Again, can you all hear? I'll speak to part of that. It's become so clear the degree to which racial disparity explains our drug policy in this country. You had crack cocaine in the 1980s. Who was being accused of that? And where was that population being affected? It was, Hispanic, blacks primarily in inner city neighborhoods. So we applied massive police force to deal with the crack epidemic. Now you come forward and you see the opioid crisis in rural areas and suburban areas affecting primarily a white population, of course. Now it's not a problem with police enforcement, SWAT teams, it's a matter of treatment. And in fact, what's happening is quite remarkable with our police enforcement system in this country. We have a massive movement towards diversion when it comes to the opioid crisis. About 2.5 years ago, police chief in Gloucester, Massachusetts, put out word because 3 youth in his neighborhood or his area in Gloucester had died of drug overdoses. He said, I did this on Facebook, you bring your paraphernalia into our office, our police station, we will find treatment for you. And that went viral. And now that policy has mobilized nationally. There's a group of about 300 police chiefs that meet nationally under the leadership of Task. Pam Rodriguez, who heads that, will be here, I think, in the 3rd week of our presentation. It's a remarkable change. It shows the degree to which, if nothing else, there's a profoundly racist, more than undercurrent that affects our drug policy. But I do think that as we realize that that's happening, as we discuss things and analyze them and develop the mass responses that I hope will come out of groups like this, that public opinion will change. Public opinion does change, and simply making aware of that disparity, I think, will begin to affect how we respond to the opioid crisis. I'd also make, if you want to wonder if change occurs, 3 or 4 years ago we were fighting for medical marijuana in Illinois, and people were saying all the things you say to oppose that. Now that's flipped. People are realizing, to some degree, that medical marijuana actually can help people off of their opioid crisis at much less personal pain and towards at least the path of recovery. So understanding is so much part of this, and we need to get the word out, and I think we will respond differently over time.
And the more optimistic you might also be that we learned from our past, right? We saw what effect we had, and we used a law enforcement response, and we're changing the approach this time around. It's a different drug, it's a different population, so those things are sometimes difficult to unlock.
Let me say one more thing. Michelle Alexander is an icon for many of us. She spoke at the Drug Policy Alliance in July, and she said, don't fool yourselves. If the next crisis comes along and it affects black people, it may be very much like it was in the past, and we've got to build a movement. We've got to move towards democracy in this country for all people of all colors and races. And I think she's profoundly right. So you can be optimistic, but we also got to be wary, and we've got to move forward.
I think this is a question probably for you, Dave. Why was more crime committed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
All sorts of reasons. So if I could answer that, I'd be able to answer why did crime drop so much since then. So there were a lot of things changing. The thing I'd say is that a lot of things that drove the increase in crime, those factors is what explains the drop in crime, just quickly. So differences in the economy, differences in educational opportunity, all those things that kind of get at the root causes of criminal behavior. What we know from trying to really dissect the drop in crime is that some of that is due to the increased use of incarceration, but the majority is not explained by that. So really what we have to realize is the criminal justice system itself doesn't have an enormous impact on crime. Right? The justice system, for the most part, responds to crime. So it's the things that affect behavior like education and mental health and substance abuse disorders and economic opportunity. Those are what drive crime, and those aren't the things the criminal justice system controls.
Okay, we were hoping to have kind of segments at the end of each of these sessions over the 4 weeks, at the end where we talk about some solutions and also things that people can do to get involved. We're running short on time because we had a couple different things happening tonight. So I think before you guys go, I'd like to hear from you what you think is like a promising thing, a thing that should be done, a promising thing maybe that is happening. And then also, I'm curious to hear from you what you think, given your experience, what you'd like to see citizens do.
There are a lot of things that we can do. I think that, we've got an Attorney General election and we've got a gubernatorial election. So kind of thinking about where the candidates kind of thoughts on that. But I want to cite something that I think a lot of people have been a part of here. I think we've gotten really smart in terms of affecting state's attorneys' races, right? So we elected Kim Foxx, and Kim Foxx is a really progressive prosecutor, and she does some really good things. But one of the things that I want to give people pause at is that the fact of the matter is that, the majority of prosecutors, the 700 prosecutors, are the same prosecutors, right? So you've changed directions at the top, and that's good, and that's bringing us more, bringing us benefits. But we have kind of the same prosecutors, and culture change takes a long time. I think if we really want to continue that fight, then we need to become much more educated about judges, right? We might not be able to change who the specific prosecutor was in a courtroom, but we can certainly have an effect on who the judges are and ensure that the judges that we have share the concerns that we have. Shameless plug, John Bitts is over there to the right. To my right, he's running for judge. I think he's a really good judge. But just thinking through people that share our views in these rooms as judges, I think is one of the things we can do. There are much other things we can do as well.
Yeah, I would build on that and say that the leeway that prosecutors had, and still have, and I'm talking about state's attorneys and then prosecutors, lead prosecutors in all counties around the state, was a well-kept, and still is a well-kept secret. And only now are we realizing that because of the sentencing structure that we've heard about, that created much higher and tougher sentencing laws, and the fact that nobody was really watching prosecutors, just simply gave them the opportunity to move forward in very aggressive ways and think what their scorecard is. We all want to be successful in what we do. Well, what makes prosecutors successful? The number of prosecutions. I think the election of Kim Foxx was a watershed change. I think it took long. I worked closely enough to realize that when Anita Alvarez was state's attorney, she prosecuted at almost every opportunity. We've begun to be aware of that. I think Kim Foxx's election was a function of being aware of that. We need to spread that word. We need to find ways to hold prosecutors more accountable. There are two ways of thinking about change. One is a mass movement, and we need that, but there are also things at the margin when they occur, change attitudes. Two immediate ones are what we've heard about cash bail all around the state, not just in Cook County, and pinning down what's already started in Cook County. Charlene Grace, who's going to be on one of these panels in the next couple of weeks, is leading that effort along with Sharone. So that's a major increment possible. Second is what we might call a decarceration, changing class 4 low-level felony possessions, just reclassifying them, considering them misdemeanors. Many of the things that are low-level class 4 felonies for possession of drugs beyond marijuana shouldn't be criminalized at all. They should be decriminalized. But move it forward. Move it at least to the point where they're misdemeanors. A lot harder to get through life if you've got a felony on your record than if you've got a misdemeanor. And as David has pointed out, attitudes change with incremental improvement. So those are two things very specifically that we can do in the coming several months. And then, of course, just consider the sea change in public attitude between the Obama administration and the Trump administration when it comes to crime. Evan Freund is sitting here. He's working with Indivisible Chicago to change public attitudes and affect who we elect. Nothing could matter more.
And I'll say one more thing to that. That's, one of the things we talked about is there was a kind of this national movement toward criminal justice reform, and we were having a really good 8 or 10 years. We're at a breaking point. That may change. And it's because there's not that leadership in Washington, D.C., whether it's the White House or the Department of Justice or the Office of Civil Rights. Federal prisoners are only a small percent of total prisoners, but that effect turning against being smart on crime to going back to being tough on crime has an effect on what we do here in this state. So being here in this room and being educated about these issues and really thinking them through are going to be important, because we're going to have a place in time where being smart on crime, we may be in a place in time where being smart on crime isn't cool anymore. Where it's not a something that Democrats and Republicans can all be, sing Kumbaya. We're really at a breaking point right here in the next couple of years, and we'll see what happens.
So get a copy of the State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform. Read the recommendations, and those are the ones I support, because I voted for that. But in all seriousness,
John McLees, put it in your mind.
In all seriousness, I think the most important thing is doing what you're doing, becoming more educated about the issue, becoming less influenced by the rhetoric that we hear, and really holding our elected officials accountable for doing the right thing. And by right thing, I mean the thing that actually is effective in addressing the problem. We're easily sold a bill of goods that in the end really doesn't provide us with the public safety that we're expecting. It taxes us significantly, and it's really a false promise. So, I'm one for getting people to vote intelligently and understand who they're voting for and hold them accountable. And I'm actually a little bit optimistic. I think a lot of states like Illinois, we're so far down the road now in terms of implementing reform that some of the hiccups at the federal level, given the dynamics and personality there, might not be enough to change the minds and attitudes of the majority of the population. But there is always that risk, the point that Al makes, that we're one crisis away from that potentially being a galvanizing moment where the public says we need to do something to address this problem. And hopefully it's do it in a way that fixes the problem and isn't just a punitive response.
And I'm afraid we should probably leave it there for tonight. There are 3 more sessions that I know John is going to want you to show up for. John, did you want to say anything, promote any of those, or you're standing and walking over this way fairly conspicuously?
Well, mostly thank you guys for your participation. Next week we have a really outstanding program with the head of the Bureau of Corrections, the head of the John Howard Association, and 2 of the people that are working hard on reentry issues. With respect to legislation, you'll see some information in your binders and a reference to the Sentencing Policy Advisory Council. Go online, you can find their detailed analysis of the bill that they put in the budget that you can support it. But even if all of those things were passed, it's doubtful that they would be sufficient to reduce the ones that actually be proposed of the recommendations of the Commission. They would be sufficient to have a reduction that is desired. But supporting that bill 3355 would